Okay, all right, live again. Sorry about that, folks. As people filter in here, definitely let me know. I'm sure the audio quality is going to drop off a bit because it's not using the mic. We're using the webcam mic. But definitely let me know if we're getting the same interference as this starts. I'm going to share the link on Twitter here just to make sure we're okay. If the audio quality drops down, that's okay. I just want to make sure it doesn't. We don't have any static or anything. I might need to recalibrate this further down. Let's see. Here we go. Take two. All right. Sounds good now? Okay, good. All right. Good. Okay, so wait. We'll go ahead and jump into it here. I went ahead and shared the link on this. Okay, good. So yeah, probably just an issue with this. I did angle it differently, so we probably had something, but regardless. Anyway, I'll go ahead and just start. We'll just start fresh here. Thank you again for tuning in on the both parts of the Carl Long video, which is now the longest video on this channel. I believe when you put the two parts together, well over 2 hours of Carl Long content. And just about a week after I originally scheduled to have it completed, I wanted to kind of shoot for Charlotte, given that a lot of his career seemed to revolve around that race and the 600 in particular. But actually, it's kind of cool being able to push it a little bit later and do it as a lead in to our return of trackside coverage at Sears Point this weekend, and certainly exciting to do that, especially since we don't really have any track activity today. I understand that the track raised a lot of money through their charity laps at the Speedway earlier today, so kudos to them on that. But the actual on-track activity will kick off tomorrow with the ARCA Menard Series West, as well as the Classic Trans Am Series, apparently Mike Joy is competing in. And then Sunday, of course, the return of the Toyota Save Mart 350 for the first time since 2019, and with the more low downforce version of the package that was last run out there. We'll certainly talk about that as well to kind of preview the stories going into it. It had faded out of the first stream right after I said no change. May have jumped. Yeah, no worries, Beast of Metal. Yeah, I think I'd rather make sure to get the working because it probably would have popped back up again. So that's kind of where we are with that. But yeah, so yeah, really with the Carl Long video, I really appreciate you guys for tuning in there. Again, as I mentioned in the previous version of the stream here, if you weren't able to check out either part during the premiere last night and tonight, both parts are now publicly available for a combined more than 2 hour feature length, pretty much experience there. A lot of interviews in this one, and that is very much going to be the trend for the next episode in particular. I know a while back that I mentioned that there was one driver that I interviewed that had more than 2 hours of content. That actually was not Carl Long. That's going to be the next one. The next episode has that. So I anticipate the next episode is going to be very interview dense in that one. I haven't mentioned the subject matter in case you haven't seen it. Of course, it's at the end of the video there, but if you have seen it, of course, you're aware of what the subject matter is. So that will be coming up next. And of course, with the race weekends here, the next couple weeks, the focus is going to kind of shift to the trackside coverage there. And then that's going to be episode 8 will be further down the line there, but very excited to bring that to you. If you are interested in the full Carl Long interview, I do have that in the Patreon. It's about an hour in length there by itself. Most of it was used in the video, but not all of it. There's a couple of stories. There's a couple accounts that just had to be cut for time, pretty much, mostly. There's one story that actually explains the dangers of the Glen Auto Water Services Company that gets mentioned in there. A rather the frightening diving accident is described in there. So definitely a warning if that's definitely something you'd rather not hear, then I'd rather recommend not listening to that. It's about halfway into that interview there, but I left it out of the main video. And if those of you in the $10 level of the Patreon to check that out, you may soon realize why. It's not a large part of that interview, but that's one part of it. There's other accounts where he describes, also the just the different personalities he worked with. I think one thing you notice in the history of both those parts is all the different teams that he ran for. He gets much more known for the number 46 in his own car, and yes, it was. But you see both in part 1, the lead up to that, and then part 2 after that point. He had to really pick up rides from all kinds of different drivers and all kinds of different teams. And the frequency with which he worked with Rick Ware, I thought was very interesting. I thought that was just in 2002. But then if you look at other parts of it, even in 2004 and then 2011 when he was in the Xfinity Series, and then even that kind of tying in Timmy Hill to his experience with the team too. Again, it's a small universe here, but it's interesting how that all comes together and leads to what Carl now has. Now as a team that's in the Cup Series, trying to get back to full-time, but several full-time Xfinity Series team. Now Timmy with his own Truck Series team. Very interesting what they've been able to contribute to the series and how they got to that point. And that's where it kind of reminded me of the JD project to an extent. It's a story primarily about Carl, of course, but also the many other people that he worked with and how they now have roles in the sport. So that was kind of a big aspect of that. So yeah, again, I hope it's something that is kind of eye-opening for you guys. It certainly was to me putting it together. I anticipated from the number of clips and the length of the interview itself that it was already going to be a pretty long project, but only until I actually put it on the timeline and started putting it together did I realize exactly how much even longer it was going to be. But yeah, very enjoyable, and kudos to Carl Long for the interview back in January. It took quite a bit longer to get to this one than I anticipated here, but very glad to put it together. I hope he had a chance to check it out. And again, really interesting stories there. I didn't mean to be harsh on David Starr. When I mentioned David Starr at the beginning of the second episode, I mean, the first thing, of course, comes to mind, like everybody, is that incident at Homestead. But of course, as all of us know, he had a fantastic run going in that event, and unfortunately cut short by that accident there at Homestead with the tire coming apart. I thought about revisiting that at the end of the episode. But really at that point, especially, that was kind of one of the things that got cut out there, again, with the length of it. I felt like kind of summarizing together, again, the number of flashes of brilliance the team has had, and that's certainly one of them. But also Timmy Hill's performances at Daytona, and even the ability to kind of harken back to the team's past and talking about the Glidden paint scheme, the same one that you see at the very beginning of part one, showing up on Carl's late model hauler. All kinds of interesting things. Mark Thompson's run when he came back into the series, I thought of bringing that in there a bit more because I kind of touched on him a little bit in the episode 1 about the ARCA drivers getting in there. Same thing with Jerry Hill to tie in with Timmy Hill. But at that point, I think we were pushing closer to 3 hours. And I think as much as you guys are interested in as much field fillers content as possible, it just became too long at that point. So there were some difficult cuts to be made at that point. But I hope that it's a good characterization of Carl and his career, and really, explains really why he's been as popular as he's been throughout his career. He's been an underdog from the very beginning of it, even back in his time there in the All-Pro Series running the Austin Crackers car. So it was interesting to really put that together, and I appreciate him for taking the time for the interview. Appreciate also Brian Hallman for the fantastic pictures, both from his and Jerry Hayslip's collection. Big thanks to Carl Long's Facebook page, as well as carllongmotorsports.com, which have tremendous photo archives. This is the first episode where I had too much content to put in there. I mean, not just in the videos, but the pictures as well. So really had to kind of decide which ones were going to be in there and which ones weren't. So much more. If you're interested in more on Carl's career, you could certainly do worse than check out carllongmotorsports.com and the Carl Long Facebook group. You're going to find a tremendous amount there, including very comprehensive accounts of those many qualifying attempts. As the theme of the episode showed, even though, of course, this year the lack of qualifying generally for NASCAR's top divisions has kind of taken hold. I think it's, all of us are kind of looking forward to the return of qualifying and, the stories that come about, not just at the top of the field going for the pole, but the guys trying to qualify for races. And as much as I'm not a big fan of the charter system for sure, that's certainly one reason why the drama of a lot of these competitors trying to get in there and people respecting that and understanding it. And Carl Long, I think, is more than anybody else, really been challenged by that and really having to just absolutely put it all out there to try to get cars in the field, whether it's the battles with Derek Cope when he was being squeezed out at the McGlynn team, or driving for the likes of John Carter or himself. and progressively improving over that time as well. I mean, his best run in the Twin 125s was actually his very last run there in 2009, finishing on the lead lap. Had a shot at actually racing his way into the Daytona 500 in a very stacked entry list with that back then, with a whole other group of small teams. So again, very interesting story. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I can't believe I completely forgot about JTG Daugherty Racing and Team Extreme Motorsports. Mea culpa on that. I think one thing I really like trying to do in this series is to not only put yourself in that time period and understand what it was like back in 2004, which I never thought of it being like a throwback time, but it certainly is now. But also trying to connect it to the present day. So if I could bring up like a driver or a team that's current day there, I mean, I'm kind of it's the temptation is there to kind of make that link, but also you can't forget about the steps in between. And certainly Brad Daugherty's efforts with JTG Daugherty Racing and Jonathan Cohen's at the Team Extreme team certainly need to be mentioned in the same breath as Thea Dixon. Big reason I mentioned Thea Dixon so much in the first episode is I felt he had been overlooked, quite honestly, especially in a lot of the discussion about 2311 this year. And as exciting as though it is, it's actually kind of encouraging to know that it's not just Wendell Scott 2311 and nothing in between. There's been a number of different minority team owners working through there. Even Anna Glenn, that was the co-owner of the Glenn Racing team that Carl drove for in 2004. She was of Hispanic ancestry as well. So there was kind of almost connecting the kind of different things in Daniel Suarez's career, or other presences in there. So all kinds of interesting details, and a lot of that's in Carl Long's full interview as well. That's kind of touched on a little bit in the full version of the video here, but gone into a little bit more in depth in that as well. So you can definitely check that out as well. Again, really enjoyed putting that together. The next episode I think is going to be very interesting as well. It's going to require a little bit of a different approach, but I think it's going to be a good follow-up to this as well. I don't know if it's going to be 2 parts. I'm kind of hoping it's going to be just one, but work has already kind of begun on that, kind of sorting stuff out there. So again, thank you guys for sharing that. Definitely make sure you keep sharing the links and all that with everybody. So I want to also mention, again, this is going to be very short tonight. We're not going to do trivia tonight. We'll do that in our post-race show. But my thinking is probably going to do the post-race show for Sears Point on Monday is kind of what I'm looking at. When we get back on Sunday, it's probably going to be on the later side of it there. Probably around like I would say 5 or 6 Pacific time again this coming Monday. So just look forward to that for those of you that are regular viewers of our post-race show. We'll certainly do a full review of what happens in this upcoming weekend at Sears Point, as well as the Xfinity Series action from Mid-Ohio. That's going to be an interesting thing to juggle during the Saturday activity. We're kind of planning things out right now to try to make sure we get up there before the 10 o'clock green flag, 10 o'clock Pacific at least, for that. That should be an interesting show as well. But yeah, I'm really going to be interesting to see what's going on here. And actually, speaking with a few people there as well, they're going to be up at the track this weekend. I'm going to try. I usually am around the media center in the garage area with all the regulations and everything this year. I'm not sure how that's going to really look. What I'd like to do is kind of wander a bit more around the track than usual. So if you see me, I'm going to be wearing my regular uniform, the plaid shirt and the white hat and the utility belt and all that. So if you see me and you're a viewer here of these videos or the stuff on the channel, don't be afraid to say hi. I'm certainly I don't think our group is big enough to do tweet ups like Jeff Gluck and Bob PostRace do. But yeah, I mean, if we cross paths, I'm certainly happy to talk with anybody out there at the track. And that also applies for next week, of course, when we're going to be covering the All-Star race in Texas. Just earlier today, we watched the 2005 running of the Dodge Save Mart 350, now the Toyota Save Mart 350. And one thing that immediately came to mind is the challenge of Sears Point often being an obstacle to really dominant seasons. I mentioned this in the Why Sears Point is Awesome video a while back, that Davey Allison in his difficult bid for the 1992 championship had a wreck in the early laps, dropped him further back in the lineup. Casey Kane was very good in 2006, struggled at Sears Point. Jeremy Mayfield was the point leader in 1998, struggled at Sears Point, lost the point lead to Jeff Gordon. Gordon went on to have one of the most dominant seasons ever. In the 2005 race we watched today, that was his first win of the season, and he rolled to the championship that year after not winning up to that point. Up to that point, Roush Racing was the most dominant team. And while they were still dominant all the way to the end of the year, it was Stewart who prevailed for the championship. Same thing with Morgan Shepherd in 1990. The reason I bring this up, of course, is because dominance is the big theme coming into this weekend's race. Hendrick Motorsports, top of the list. Chase Elliott is almost seemingly being handed this victory, it seems, by most discussing the odds of it. And while I do think he's going to be a factor, it's easy to forget that he was up in the top 5 and then had mechanical failure the last time he was out there in 2019. The track seems to have a say in, who's going to have good luck and who isn't. And given the streak of great runs that Hendrick Motorsports has had at both Dover and, of course, the 600 just last week, one has to wonder it's not going to be able to go on forever. And is this track going to be the obstacle that it has been in the past? Or are we going to see Chase Elliott or Kyle Larson or one of these other drivers just keep that momentum going? We've certainly seen that in the past. The last few years before the pandemic canceled the race last time, it seemed like every race is going to be won by either Martin Truex or Kevin Harvick. Kind of a flashback to the time where Ricky Rudd and Rusty Wallace were the most dominant guys, and Mark Martin and Jeff Gordon were just trying to kind of work their way in. How it could shake out, I mean, it's going to be tough to say. I know that on the road course at Austin, we even saw drivers like Ross Chastain work themselves into contention. We saw Ryan Preece do well. A lot of that was part of the chaos that we saw because of the rain, but it could just as well have a factor in the actual fact that it was a road course. Christopher Bell winning the Daytona Infield Road Course. I don't think anybody predicted that, much less Joey Logano being right up there in the mix as well. Logano has had a streak of kind of mid-pack finishes at Sears Point coming into this, but he is a past pole winner and had some great runs there as well. Could he turn things around? As I posted yesterday, my fantasy pick is Kevin Harvick. And quite honestly, Kevin Harvick reminds me of many drivers that have come into this race looking for a complete turnaround and finding it here in the Sonoma Valley. We saw this with Jeff Gordon in 2006, where he was off to a very difficult start in the season and ended a losing streak that I believe went back to Martinsville the previous fall, winning a race right after I believe that was after he proposed to Ingrid Van de Bosch. So it was a high weekend there, high spirit weekend for him in that sense. Tony Stewart in 2005, Kyle Busch in 2015 certainly comes to mind, coming off the injury and beating his brother there in that race, and then going on, not really cruising, but going on to take the championship. I see a lot of that in Harvick here. Not only the fact of him being a past Sears Point winner, but also being really a factor in most of these. Also kind of tickled by the concept of his beer over wine paint scheme. I know people certainly in our neck of the woods would call that into question with the bit of cheekiness that you see in one paint scheme over the other. But I think that's pretty cool. I think it's an interesting tie-in too. So I would expect Harvick to be very challenging in this particular race. And I think Stewart-Haas's struggles, much like Hendricks or Joe Gibbs or any of these other teams before, whether or not it's going to continue or, if they're going to get some reprieve from it, I think Sears Point is going to be a good litmus test for that. Denny Hamlin, I think, could be mentioned in the same breath. The fact that he hasn't won in 14 previous attempts at this race certainly makes you look at it. Of course, his battle with Tony Stewart in 2016 comes to mind, leading the race till the very last moment, and then having that miscue in turn 11 that ended up having Tony Stewart score his final victory there. Denny Hamlin's been knocking on the door this year, but the Joe Gibbs team has certainly shown their ability to play spoiler in the Hendrick battle there, kind of mixing it up and preventing the top 4 sweep at the 600 was Kyle Busch. And Kyle Busch himself is going to be an interesting figure to watch too. Even though he's a past winner, mentioned in 2015 as well as 2008, he's also been a driver that if he gets the slightest bit of frustrations out there, he tends to get involved in some other people's accidents and drop out of contention. I think 2010, if I remember correctly, when he ran the Transformers car, he hit everything but the pace car and was not at all a factor in it. 2013, I believe, he also was getting kind of run over in traffic and ultimately didn't settle in the finish there. Kyle Busch, you never know which one you're going to ultimately see. Back in 2019, he was tracking down Martin Truex, but seemed to be somehow aware of the limitations of his car, that he wasn't going to actually make his way around Martin Truex Jr. for the finish, and ultimately Truex scored the victory. Further behind him, you have to also look at the number 95 car that Matt DiBenedetto ran at the time. DiBenedetto is still looking for his first victory now with the Wood brothers, still trying to get that 100th win. The Wood brothers have come agonizingly close to winning at Sears Point. In 2005, the race we just watched today, Ricky Rudd was out there on old tires in the same chassis he won with Robert Yates back in 2002. Tony Stewart caught him with a transmission that was failing, and with 10 laps to go, made the winning pass in turn 11. And Rudd had to settle for second. In 2008, Marcus Ambrose was driving for him. At the time, JTG Daugherty was starting to actually really start out in the sport and working with the Wood brothers. Marcus Ambrose was running in the top 10, spun out, had a mechanical failure soon after that, and dropped out of contention from there. That same race saw David Gilliland finish second. This time around, the 95 team doesn't exist. Of course, it's now changed hands to 2311 Racing. And is Bubba Wallace going to be able to build on that experience? What notes, if any, were saved from the time that the 95 car did that well with Matt DiBenedetto behind the wheel? And how can that help Bubba Wallace himself? Wallace has seemed to really struggle at the road courses in these first few years. How is that going to compare against Daniel Suarez and the Trackhouse team in their first attempt? The Childress team seems to be very quietly a factor in a lot of these road courses. Of course, you think about Dale Earnhardt's win back in 1995, but even more recently, Austin Dillon seems like he's able to kind of keep the fenders on that car. And Tyler Reddick, and I guess what I believe is going to be his first attempt at Sears Point, now sneaking back into the top 16 in points. We'll see if he's able to kind of keep things up going at the same time. It's a little disappointing that it's only 37 cars on the entry list, which is the shortest field that we've ever had at Sears Point, the previous being 38 the last 3 years. But I do think we're going to see a very interesting and competitive race. But I also don't think it's going to go necessarily the way everybody expects it to. Because, again, that track is one that has always made things as unpredictable as possible. Certainly Kyle Larson with his fourth straight pole at this, although the pole this time won under different circumstances with the metric. Now starting at the front of the field up until 2019, hadn't finished in the top 10 in any of those starts after winning the pole. So we'll see if he gets things turned around here. Chase Elliott again to be the factor. William Byron was on the front row, won a stage in 2019. And then you look at Alex Bowman, who's just been an absolute stake in the grass this season, whether it's been his win at Dover or the win at Richmond. If you get a late race restart or something, maybe the 48 could be just as much of a surprise as it was in 2010 when Jimmy Johnson prevailed over the mistake by Marcus Ambrose there at the end. What of Scott Heckert, the only road course ringer that's going to be in the field, driving the number 78 for the Live Fast team, the other new team that's in the lineup this time around? We haven't seen BJ McLeod's effort in the Cup Series at Sears Point ever. Since then, McLeod ran the 78 car with Rick Ware equipment last year, started his own organization, got a charter, got this whole program together, and Heckert had a solid run at the Daytona Infield Road Course. I don't think we even talked about it back in February, but they're going to be ones to certainly look at. And also, one of the conflicts here with a couple of drivers that are looking to switch teams. Carl Edwards famously took the victory here in, I believe, 2014 after there were constant rumors he was being hounded about leaving to Joe Gibbs Racing, which, of course, he ultimately did. Now with both Brad Keselowski and Kurt Busch finding themselves in similar situations, especially Keselowski, how are things going to turn around for them? Keselowski still hasn't won at Sears Point, and I believe other than a couple of years ago has never even had a real top 5 here, whereas Kurt Busch won one of the most dominant races in recent memory in 2011 for Penske, and now driving the number 1 car that, very easily could have taken some victories with Jamie McMurray, who unfortunately had some struggles here through a lot of his career. How are they going to perform? Ross Chastain is certainly no stranger to coming to a race without any practice or qualifying. In fact, in 2019, he arrived at the track right after winning the truck race at Gateway, after his win at Iowa was stripped off of him. He came back to the track with no practice or qualifying, jumped into Premium Motorsports car, and I don't remember offhand where he finished, but I know for sure it wasn't in last place. So what can he do in the 42 car? The same number that Kyle Larson had won all those poles with the number of years. And I still think that run at COTA was pretty eye-opening. So a lot of things to look at. I'm just scratching the surface here, and that's not even talking about the battle for last place, which in 2019, I believe, took until about 50 or 60 laps of the 90-lap event. Or is it going to be settled very early like we've had in 2006 where there was a wreck on the opening lap? Or is it going to be settled very much towards the end? We're going to find out. And the action is going to start tomorrow with the action there at the track. So with that, I'm going to pretty much just leave that for the show tonight. Like I say, I'm not going to do any trivia this evening. We'll do that in our post-race show next week. But I just want to, again, thank you for checking out both parts of Rise of the Field Fillers episode 7 on Carl Long. Unfortunately, Carl Long's team not among the entrants this week at Sears Point. But stay tuned for more action from the track this weekend. At Last Car on Brock is the Twitter feed. LastCar.info is the website, and patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock is the Patreon. We have several new names added to the magnet for this weekend. If you join between now and June 13th, any level of Patreon, I get your name added onto that magnet, which is going to be on the side of my car this weekend and the side of my rental car when we go down to Texas next week. Pretty much everything except the plane that we're flying there is going to have that on there. And after all of that is over with, that's going to be, you'll be entered in a drawing to win that. And the winner, of course, gets that mailed to them. So lots of exciting stuff coming up here. And it all begins this weekend in the Sonoma Valley. I hope to have you guys along for the ride. And yeah, stay tuned for a lot more. I'm on enough code red today that I'm going to have a little hard time sleeping tonight, but I'm going to try very hard to and get you guys some good coverage from behind the scenes there. So it's my first time to the Bay Area since we moved out of the old headquarters last fall. So don't really know what to expect, but I'm just going to kind of roll with it, and we'll find out what happens. So thank you for tuning in tonight, folks. And tune in next Monday for our post-race show after Sears Point. If it's any earlier, I'll let you know on the Last Car on Brock Twitter feed there. But most likely that's going to be when our next show will be. So have a great weekend, everyone, and I will see you next week.